Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And now today's front pages, as ever, lots and lots of politics, lots of Europe, lots of stories, lots of Boris. Boris fury over EU bullying scandal. That's the story you're hearing about on the news. This is John Longworth, who is the head of the British Chamber of Commerce, lost his job, it is alleged, after number 10 bullying. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on. Sunday Times there, like lots of papers, it's got a picture of Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall getting married yesterday. We'll talk about that as well. A scary-sounding story here. EU fuels terror and fascism, warns Gove. Well, that's pretty clear. And Boris rages at number 10's gagging of critic. There's a story saying cripes, but that's not about Boris. Sunday Express, EU seeks control of our coast, the Spanish Armada bobbing up to and then Johnson, different Johnson, move quickly beyond that. Top headhunters admit UK bosses pay absurdly high. A lot of people will agree with that, of course. Now, we're going to stick with The Observer, I think, Liz Kendall, because your first story is at the bottom of the front page of The Observer.
That's right. I mean, the paper's, as you say, dominated by this debate about our membership of the EU. And the story that I think is very important is that Alan Johnson and Chuka Umunna are issuing a call to arms amongst Labour members and supporters to go out and make the passionate case for us to remain part of the EU.
We haven't really heard a great deal from the Labour Party. I mean, both fine chaps, I'm sure, but they are not the leaders of the Labour Party anymore.
Well, the story so far has been dominated by splits amongst the Tories, and I think what Alan is rightly saying is we have to go out and make the case. You know, this is the biggest political issue we face in a generation, and it's going to rest on Labour members and supporters getting out to vote to make sure we remain part of the EU. And there are some on the left of the party who may be prevaricating about our membership, but actually it's about jobs, growth, and the politics of solidarity, and we have to make that case.
John, you, like me, have been covering these things for a fair number of years. The left of the Labour Party, way back in the 70s and 80s, was very anti-European. Yeah, and that, in a way, is the Corbyn tradition.
The Peter Shaws, the Tony Benns, they were very equivocal on Britain's membership of the European Union, or the common market as it was then. And those doubts still exist. And then there was a period where the social chapter came into Europe, and Labour suddenly embraced it because they were thinking, workers' rights will get a minimum. Exactly. And so suddenly the Labour Party became pro-European. My vantage point is 3,000 miles away, but I've been struck, I suppose, over the past couple of weeks trying to watch the Labour Party, just how quiet it has felt that the Labour Party have been on the whole EU subject. They don't seem to be, leading the fight at all.
Well, without doubt, we have to make that passionate case. We still have 1 in 5 voters undecided. Many of those are women, and I would like to see more women having a stronger voice in this campaign, because at the moment it's very male-dominated.
Fair point. Sticking with the same story, a terrifying front-page headline there from the Sunday Times: EU fuels terror and fascism. That's Michael Gove.
Yeah, we've already had the sort of the sobriquet Project Fear, and we saw the way the Scottish referendum was fought, with the kind of sense of, be very frightened. And we get a paragraph like this: the London Mayor and the Justice Secretary warned that staying in the EU would make it harder to identify terrorists and keep the UK safe, and accused Brussels of fueling a rise in Hitler worshippers across the continent. It all sounds pretty terrifying.
Sounds like Project Fear is in full throttle on both sides.
Exactly. So, and I kind of wonder what people who are trying to weigh the arguments, who will be voting on June, are going to make of, will they believe it if the visions are both so apocalyptic on either side, where there seems to be no room for nuance or shades of grey?
It's all getting a bit shouty. I mean, this whole business about Mr. Longworth losing his job, which is also part of the same story. We don't really know. Number 10 denies bullying him. A lot of people around him claim that he was bullied, or that the BCC, the British Chambers of Commerce, were obliged to fire him because they want to stay neutral. But I think almost every public figure is under pressure now to say which side they're on.
Yes, I think there's huge public pressure, and in the industry particularly, because that is seen as a clinching argument to say X number of captains of industry say Britain is better off, is worse off by being in or being out.
And I think it is those voices that are going to convince people in the end. There'll be a lot of, heat and fury, and it will be the leaders of companies like Toyota and Rolls-Royce who have raised real concerns about what would happen to their businesses if Britain left the EU. I think the public is more likely to believe those voices ultimately than politicians.
If Mr. Longworth is watching, I can reassure him, you have only been suspended, not fired. That was my mistake. John Sopel, let's turn now to the job that you've been doing day in, day out. Now, you're going to do Osborne next, or are you going to do an American story?
Well, I was just going to talk about, actually, the debate over whether there should be a televised discussion before the referendum. Now, in the US, we have had endless TV debates of varying qualities, and
extraordinary screaming matches. Actually,
extraordinary screaming matches. Donald Trump discussing all sorts of things aside from the strength of his candidacy in one of the most recent debates, which we won't go into. But also his two principal candidates. They are now known. Ted Cruz is now known as Lying Ted, and Marco Rubio is now known as Little Marco. These are kind of the way Trump has portrayed his opponents, and they're just talking about whether you could have a fair, balanced TV debate 2 days out from the referendum with a 12,500 strong audience at Wembley, and kind of apparently the pro-EU side of it getting a little queasy about the prospect.
In a modern, open democracy, surely we should be having such a debate. Everybody should be able to watch the big beasts from both sides test each other rather than via people like me.
I completely agree, and it's absolutely one of the things that has struck me about American democracy is you've got it at grassroots level where the politicians have to campaign on a very, very local level, but you've also got the expectation that they are going to face a TV audience on a regular basis and put their arguments to the test. And it just seems a bit strange that we kind of have these debates. Are we going to have a TV debate or not?
Absolutely. Now, if it hadn't been for the European issue, of course, we'd have been talking about nothing except the budget. The looming budget. There's been a big fight about pensions, and George Osborne seems to have had a climb down over radical pension reform.
And there's a story here about not just the climb down over pensions, but over raising social housing rents. And I think that if there is that U-turn, it would be welcome. But there are some really important long-term challenges that the Chancellor needs to address in the budget. And I just wanted to pick up something
I should say to viewers, we are now tiptoeing nervously and with trepidation into the 21st century. So there is the Sunday Herald. We can't get it here on paper. Sunday Herald from Glasgow, front page.
So there's a very interesting front page story here that keeps going off. There we are. That if you're born into a poor family, you will die 10 years earlier than if you're born into a better off family. And this lack of life chances for people who are born in more disadvantaged areas is a huge challenge for us. We will never succeed as individuals or as a country unless everyone has the chance to get on in life. And one of the things I'd like to see in the budget is, instead of doing an inheritance tax cut for the very few at the top, I want to see that money go into the early years, because what happens between 0 to 5 has a big impact on how well you do later on in life. And that's the kind of fair budget that I'd like to see George Osborne present.
Meanwhile, your leader is in some trouble in the Sunday Times, but that's not unusual. John, I would like to move to the story that you've been obsessed by, quite rightly, which is Trump. And there's an amazing Trump haircut moment on that picture.
Yes, the child who has a Donald comb over, by the look of things. Actually, the child has a pacifier in mouth and doesn't look very pacified by being in the arms of Donald Trump.
Deeply upset.
It looks deeply upset. But, I mean, the Trump phenomenon is extraordinary. Yeah. It is real. There is enormous support for him among white working class, among all sorts of groups, among all demographics, and he is a kind of a student of the polls, and he takes you through exactly what he's doing in each demographic, and he's winning in most of them. And so you'd have to say the chances are he is going to become the Republican nominee and will be fighting in a head-to-head with Hillary Clinton.
All the quotes clever people here a few weeks ago were saying, Rubio will come through, Rubio will come through, and Cruz is finished. And the clever people seem, as ever, to be wrong.
The clever people have been wrong throughout. There's the front page of the Washington Post, or the lead story from the Washington Post, which will be hitting the newsstands in a few hours.
Gosh, we're sophisticated.
Yeah, which is Cruz gains steam on Super Saturday, and talking about the victories that he had in Kansas and Maine overnight, which will boost his bid to become the chief alternative to Donald Trump. Now, what you'll have there is Ted Cruz is not the establishment candidate. Ted Cruz is loathed even more by the Republican establishment because he's seen as sort of ideologically unflinching, very much to the Christian right, and has not got one Republican supporting him, even though in the Senate, even though he's a senator himself.
But they also just don't like him as a human being, do they, James?
He's hard to warm to.
Okay.
He's not user-friendly, in a very user-friendly... And so you've got Donald Trump, and I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to stop him getting all the way to the nomination.
And there's a big observer.
Yes, I just wanted to pick out this observer leader which says we have to understand the root causes of the very real anger and frustration that Trump is picking up on.
Yeah.
You know, America may be militarily strong, but it's failing to deal with issues in Syria. There are big issues on the economy and people are angry about it. And I actually think this is the same argument in Europe. Unless you give people hope that they can have a better life and, you know, deal with these issues.
We'll be talking to Mervyn King about some of this later on. We are running out of time, so a quick thought on Mother's Day and then
my little thought on
social event of the year.
On Mother's Day is this piece which says, now I would never say forget mums because it's Mother's Day and I'll be seeing my own mother today, but she's...
Mother, hello.
Liz Jones talks about celebrating aunties, and I'm very, proud to be an auntie, and 1 in 5 women in their 40s now are childless. I am one of those women, but I love my nieces. I think an Auntie's Day would be a great idea, so celebrate aunties today as well as mums.
Finally, Rupert Murdoch.
I love looking at the Sunday newspapers, and you see 2 young starlets who've just got married, and shining out from the newspapers today we have 84-year-old Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall, 59, having married at St Bride's in Fleet Street yesterday.
A very glittering occasion.
A very glittering occasion with the good and the great there. Well, some of the good and some of the great. I mean, it's kind of like Rupert Murdoch has been a great anti-establishment figure, yet is so much part of an establishment. You know, and all the people there as well who are sort of
Andrew Lloyd Webber, Michael Caine, Michael Gove.
Michael Gove, the former Justice Secretary, was there. So I mean, you had everybody turning out, and actually the pictures do look great, and it does look like a very happy and joyous occasion.
Well, on that warm note, thank you both very much indeed. Very interesting.